When I was 2, my mom and dad divorced, and they had the arrangement where I would go see dad, and I had a brother and a sister, and we would go see dad every weekend. And so that was our arrangement. But even as a child, I always felt like I was betraying mom when I would go to dad's and have fun with dad. I know it's because my mom had negative propaganda about dad all the time. And by the time I was 13, I just felt like I had to choose between dad and mom. And I chose mom, and I told dad that I wasn't going to go be with him in the weekends anymore, and I didn't. And so from that time on, I finished high school and went to college and met my wonderful husband, and we moved here to Virginia and had our lovely daughter. And we also found a church family that helped us understand what it meant to try to live your life in God's will. And I was really trying to do that. One day I came home from school and I was 30 years old, and it had been 17 years since I had spoken to or seen my dad. And God told me as clear as he could in my head, call your dad. And I was like, I'm not calling him, no way. And it was so strong and it was so clear, it only took a few minutes for me to know that I had to call my dad. I remembered the number since I was a little girl, so I called him and I told him that God had directed me to call him and I had to obey. And he said, oh honey, I am so thankful you called. I have been praying that you would call me. And so we had a short chat and we decided that we would meet the next month. I lived in Virginia and he lived in West Virginia, and so we were 6 hours away. Well, during that time, I fretted, what was I going to say? And what was I going to do? And we had a pastor that was leading a Bible study at our home, and he was a wonderful, godly, wise man. And I said, Pastor Martin, what am I going to say to him? I don't know him. I don't love him. I don't hate him. I don't know the man. And he said, you're going to ask him for forgiveness. And I said, for what? Forgiveness? And he said, because you've been bitter all these years. And I said, I'm not bitter. He left me. And when I said that, he just looked at me with a wise grin, and I knew he was right. I had been bitter all those years. So we met at a Bob Evans. Dad was waiting in the side at the counter, and he had all of his pictures out. He had remarried and had a girl who was 18 now, and I knew them all because I had met them before I left, and I had bitterness towards all of them too. And so he hugged me and we talked for a few minutes, and then I said, Dad, I have to ask you something. And he said, what? And I said, will you forgive me? And he said, for what? And I said, because I have been bitter all these years and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And he was like, oh yes, I'll forgive you, but you don't have to. And we decided then and there that we were going to start new. And we didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about mom. We didn't talk about any of that. And so we came back in for Christmas time. Well, this was going to be another big hurdle because his stepdaughters were there. My half-sister was there. My stepmother was there, and I didn't have good feelings about them at all. And I was going to their home. And I expected to be treated poorly. I deserved to be treated poorly. But when we got there, it was so amazing. They treated us like we were royalty. Allison was 3 years old. She met her Papa Rocco for the first time. They had gifts. Everybody was hugging. It was a grace, abounding, unbelievable grace. So we had decided that every time we would come in town, we would stay there some, and we did. But the next day, I wanted to call him and his wife and thank them for their hospitality. And I said, you know, you were all so wonderful. You never made me feel guilty, and I apologized. I apologized to her and my stepsisters, and she said, your dad has just gotten back from the doctor, and he just found out today that he has lung cancer. And all I could think of was what a gift God had given me to be able to make it right with my dad before he died. And so for 8 years, we had a wonderful time. We would go visit, we would stay, we would sleigh ride, we'd have barbecues. It was just awesome. And then right before he died, I went in town and I stayed with him in the hospital to give everybody a break. And that night that I stayed all night with him, we prayed together, we talked together, we laughed together, we read the Bible together, and we cried together because we knew that he wasn't coming home, that he was going to die. It sounds horrible, it sounds painful, but it was one of the most beautiful nights of my life. And I knew he was a Christian. We had talked about that. So there was assurance of salvation. And so since that time, I've had a wonderful relationship with my sisters, not my half-sister, not my stepsisters, but my sister, and my stepmother, who's a godly woman. And what I didn't realize was that my bitterness that I had toward Dad had affected my relationships in all areas of my life, with my husband, with my daughter, and I was free. And I was just so thankful that God blessed me and was able to tell me what to do, that he spoke to me that day when I was 30. And I'm thankful that I obeyed.